Well, hey, everybody. My name is Frank Quinn. I am a commercial lines insurance agency owner. I am fortunate enough to be speaking with Mr. Marty Shaw today. Marty is a registered consulting arborist. Marty's background is quite extensive. He's written a book, which many arborists and institutions around the country refer to. He has consulted on over 500 cases and also been to about half the states in the country where he has been the capacity as an expert witness for various parties when it comes to related cases. So I would like to now introduce Marty. And Marty, what would you like to start off with in explaining about your background? Because I know that that really didn't do it justice. It's really much more extensive than that. I'd be happy to hear it from you.
Well, thank you, Frank. And I hope all your listeners out there are getting ready to have a nice, happy, and joyous Independence Day weekend. I know I am. I've been going at it pretty strong here for the last few months, and I'm really looking forward to having a nice little break in there. My background is really just trees and tree-related matter. What I do is very specialized. So there's probably fewer than a dozen people that do tree litigation support work for a living. And so maybe a dozen of us in the country that do it full time for a living. So it's a pretty specialized area. And so when an attorney or an insurance adjuster is looking at a case and they just need some really good, solid information about that case and whether or not they should try to get it resolved, then that's where I come in as an expert. I'll go out and do site visits. I'll look at the facts of the case. And oftentimes I will try to find those fact patterns that match up with cases that I've dealt with in the past. And so it's a kind of thing where you get to investigate certain fact patterns. And oftentimes one party will see the facts a certain way, and then another party will see the facts a certain way. And so my role is really to help. If it gets contentious and ends up in a lawsuit, then my role as an expert is to inform the court so that they can make a good decision. And that's really the importance of my role.
Well, thank you, Marty. And it's this is a subject that I think that many people in the industry are definitely going to be and are interested in. But just for the average person, for a homeowner, tree owners have a responsibility, and we'll be getting into that. And it's important for them to understand their responsibilities as tree owners, and also perhaps those involved with insuring the property, and those involved, of course, in working and removing or even maintaining trees, because there's a lot that could happen. So I'm looking forward to this. Can you tell us what is the difference between, I know that you touched on, being a registered consulting arborist, but what is the difference between a registered consulting arborist and the ISA certified arborist? What does that registered consulting arborist designation require that the standard certification alone doesn't?
So that's a really good question. So in the tree world, there's different levels of competency that start out at the very lowest levels, where you have a guy in a pickup truck and a chainsaw, and he may or may not have the name of the company on the side of the truck. And we kind of refer to these folks as the tree fellers. They cut down trees and they do tree work, but they may or may not be certified arborists. And the certified arborists are a much higher level of competency. So you have, in order to become an ISA certified arborist, you have to go through a fairly rigorous manual. I can actually show it to you. This is an older version of it, but this is the ISA certification manual. And so to become certified arborist, you have to know everything that's in this manual. And I believe there's 14 different domains This is, it's got 16 different chapters in it. And so if you know everything that's in this book, then you can become a certified arborist. Typically, somebody's been working in the industry with experience for a couple of years before they take the ISA certification exam. So it is a minimum level of competence. And if they've got ISA certification, then you know you're dealing with somebody that's pretty good, at least on a fundamental level. Now, there's another level above that called the Board Certified Master Arborist. And the Board Certified Master Arborist is many levels above the ISA Certified Arborist. These are guys that have been in the industry for at least 7 years. They've certified and recertified a couple of different times. And at the end of this book, there's a bibliography, and it's got hundreds of different references in it. Okay. And so all these different references are the references that were used in the writing of this document. But this document doesn't include everything in those references. To become a board certified master arborist, you have to know what's in here, and then you have to know what's in all the references in the bibliography of this book. And so it's a very comprehensive, very rigorous test. Less than 2% of all ISA certified arborists become board certified master arborists. Now there's another organization that's outside of the International Society of Arboriculture. It's called the American Society of Consulting Arborists. You have to have a pretty hefty resume just to become a member of the American Society of Consulting Arborists. It's not just for anybody that wants to join. You have to have done something significant within the arboricultural world just to become a member. Now, within that organization, they have another level. It's above that one, and that's called the Registered Consulting Arborist. And to become a registered consulting arborist, it's a very rigorous program. You have to attend an academy, and then you have to be able to demonstrate that you know how to write a report that would be at least passing to the Daubert standard, which is the legal standard for expert witnesses. And so in order to be able to write a report to that level, you have to be able to demonstrate it 3 different times. And it's essentially the equivalent of a PhD in arboriculture.
Wow. Well, that's an amazing accomplishment that you've achieved, Marty. And you're actually one of the first in Tennessee to have, you're the first in Tennessee to have the designation. Which is that?
Well, I was actually the third. There was a guy named Fred Morgan out in Memphis who was grandfathered into the RCA because he was a member before the ASCA Academy and the RCA program actually started. And then there was another guy named Zach French who actually works for me, and he was the first one in Tennessee. I was the first one in Middle Tennessee to become a member of ASCA. And so I was a member. Zach actually got his RCA credential before I got mine. I think his number is like 20 less than mine. So,
oh, wow.
but we're both board certified master arborists, and we do collaborate quite a bit together. So.
Now, how did you go from working with trees to interpreting different types of scenarios involving trees in courtrooms? What did that transition look like?
So I was working as a wholesale distributor of tree healthcare products. I was president of a company called TIPCO, and I would run around and talk to different arborists about tree healthcare and how to solve tree maladies. And I got a reputation as somebody that knew a lot about tree problems and how to solve them. And I had one customer out in Memphis. His name was Fred Morgan. And Fred was real different from every other client that I had. Fred didn't seem to do a lot. He didn't have a tree business. He wasn't out cutting down trees. He wasn't doing a lot of tree healthcare treatments. But he seemed to be doing pretty well. You know, he had a nice business, and was taking care of his family, and had he's doing all right. And so I asked Fred, I said, what is it that you do? I kind of explain it to me. And he tried to explain it to me. We spent maybe half a day together. And, he just, it didn't make sense to me. I mean, how would you make money doing that?
Mhm.
And so I asked him if I could spend another half a day with him. He said, yeah, sure. He seemed to have plenty of free time. And so I spent another half a day. Finally, he explained it to me this way. He said, now, Marty, what I do is I have a client that calls me up. They have some sort of issue with their trees. And what I do is I go out and I talk to them and give them advice about their trees. And then they send me a check. And I couldn't believe that. I was like, wow, that's for me. So I asked Fred, I said, do you think I'd be any good at that? And he said, Marty, you'd be great at it. And he was right. And right after that, I became the first member of ASCA in Middle Tennessee. And from that point on, that's what I wanted to do for a career.
Well, that's fantastic. And thank you for sharing that, Marty. Now, a lot of people may not understand that trees have certain types of values. And when it comes to putting a dollar price on a tree, how do you do that?
Oh my. So the need for tree appraisals as amenities, we're talking about landscaping trees or conservation trees that are set aside for wildlife habitat or recreational use, things of that nature. The need for that type of appraisal, something beyond, say, timber value, has been around for well over 100 years. In fact, it goes all the way back to the period of time when people started needing to get appraisals for a mortgage back at the beginning of the 20th century. And so now both of those things have kind of grown over the years. The big difference between real estate appraisal and tree appraisal is that everybody who gets an FHA mortgage or a VA mortgage loan, they all have to get a home appraisal before they can get that loan. And so there's a lot more mortgage loan appraisals than there is any other kind of appraisal. With tree appraisals, it's kind of a narrow niche. There's not nearly as many of those that are done, but because the data that we use is quite different from real estate, because in a real estate appraisal, you're basically trying to calculate market value.
Sure.
And market value is based on homes that are very similar that have sold recently in that geographic area.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're comparing the sales price of one home to the subject home. And so you're trying to get 3 or 4 or 5 comps, and then you compare those to the subject, and then you can kind of calculate, well, this is what this house would likely sell for in a normal market. Well, with trees, we don't buy and sell 30-inch trees every day. And so if you got a 30-inch diameter tree, you got to figure out some other way to do that calculation, because the market's not going to tell us how much that tree is worth. But what we can do is we can go out to a nursery and we can calculate something called either cost to cure or cost approach to appraisal. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that works out to be just replacing it tree for tree. Other times it's just taking the benefits that tree was producing and putting new benefits back.
Okay.
And so that's the cost approach to appraisal. Now, when we do a cost approach appraisal, we have to go to a nursery. We have to calculate the cost to purchase a large, commonly available size tree of the same species. And ideally, we'll just take a wholesale cost. We'll mark it up to retail. We'll calculate the cost to transport that tree, transplant it into the subject site, and then we'll offer a guarantee to make sure that that tree is going to survive into the future. And so if we can calculate all those costs on the smaller tree, we can figure out a per square inch across the trunk, and then we apply that value per square inch to the larger tree, and then we depreciate for things like species, location, and condition. And so basically it's a put it back the way it was type of calculation. I've got active cases right now that are $5 million in tree loss.
Wow.
I've got other cases that are in the tens of millions, especially when it comes to fire damage. Those cases can be worth quite a bit.
Sure. Can you speak to or tell us about what is the most surprising or unusual case that you've been a part of?
You know, one of my very first cases was one of the most memorable cases that I ever had to deal with, because that's what really tested my mettle and really showed me that I had the ability to do investigations quite well. This was a case out in Sacramento, California. A nursery owner owned a tree nursery, but this was a nursery that was growing stock for olive production. And you know, the background of that whole thing was that Americans will drink any kind of olive oil out there. They're not real picky about it, but Europeans are very different. They are very picky about it. And so they saw an opportunity to start growing all these olive trees as a nursery in California. They had these great big greenhouses, and then they had olive production at that nursery. And so one of the things that they had to do was they were growing these olive trees, so they had to produce them. And nursery production involved filling a pot full of soil medium, which comprised mostly of peat moss. And then they would stick the olive tree in the container, and then they would water it and grow it in that container. Well, when they started the nursery, they ordered huge containers full of peat moss, and they came in shipping containers on a ship. And so inside this shipping container was a gigantic bale, 8 feet tall, 4 feet by 4 feet of peat moss in a plastic sealed container. And it was like one of those, you know, peel and it was a fairly thin mill plastic coating that they would just seal up. And if you've ever bought peat moss at a hardware store, you know that they come in a big plastic container, and you know what it looks like, right?
Yeah.
Well, imagine a giant one of these that's 8 feet tall by 4 feet by 4 feet. It's exactly like the one that you would buy, but it's a lot bigger. Okay. Well, these things sat in the lot where they were doing the production for the nursery for, I think, 2 to 2.5 years. And over time, these giant bales began to decompose. And so they would kind of slump a little bit, right? And so these bales of peat moss were in risk of falling over, but nobody knew that they could fall over. They had just been standing there for years and years, and everybody just kind of ignored it. Well, the nursery had some problems with people stealing their stuff, and so they hired a security company to secure the nursery at night. And one night, the security guard was doing his rounds. He heard a funny noise, and he went to investigate the noise. And one of these giant bales of peat moss fell on top and injured him horribly, right? Well, you know, the nursery had no idea what to do because, you know, they're getting sued for a lot of money. And so one thing led to another, and they ended up calling me. I was the only arborist at that time, I think, that had a certified nursery professional credential. And so I get the call and I do the investigation, and it turned out that, and I interviewed all the different employees, and this had never happened before. One of those giant bales had fallen over. And in the course of investigating, the security guard had no authority to go and investigate a noise. He was supposed to do certain things, and he did stuff that he wasn't supposed to be doing. And so that was one of the reasons why he got hurt. And then the other reason was that as these bales of peat moss expanded and contracted, well, the heat of the day would cause the methane gas and the carbon dioxide gas inside there to expand, and that's what caused them to slow. So they would expand and contract. Well, that day that this occurred, there was a greater temperature change. It was like 96 degrees during the day and it was 56 degrees at night. And so there was a huge difference between the daytime temperature with the sun beating down and the nighttime temperature with the contraction of the gases inside these plastic bags. That was what actually caused the thing to fall over. That was the expansion and contraction of the gas inside the bag. And so I was able to investigate all this stuff and figure it out, what happened. And I don't actually know what the outcome of that case was, but the attorney that I was working for was very, very pleased with the outcome.
That is really interesting. I thought you were headed towards perhaps saying that there was some type of bacterial growth over the course of time. And
well, there's fungal growth in there. The fungal growth created all these gases, and that's what caused it.
Okay. And what I was thinking that perhaps a customer had bought it, used it, and it then caused an issue with whatever they used it on. But to find out that it was actually the peat moss. There's a lot of surprises out there, that's for sure.
Well, that was one I cut my teeth on, and ever since then, I've always had a deep curiosity, and that deep curiosity of trying to figure out what happened has been a real motivating force for me to take on these kinds of cases and really investigate them.
Tell us, and I know you've touched on, determining the value of a tree and what goes into that, but how does that come into play when people are looking at the property that was lost? Now, and why does that matter in a claim? So when there's a claim involved and they're looking at damage and trees lost, I know typically, it's my understanding that homeowners insurance, they don't really compensate much for trees. There is an endorsement out there that can help to provide more coverage on average, but how does that come into play? What the tree is worth versus the property that was lost?
So if you're a tree owner and you want to insure a tree, there's a special rider that you have to get. Your standard policy, if it falls on your house, for example, they'll get it off. The insurance company will get it off the house, but they're not going to pay you for the loss of the benefits of the tree. Mm-hmm. And so really it's just a matter of getting it off the house. They won't even pay to clean up and haul it away. They'll just get it off your house for you. That's it. Now, when you get homeowners insurance, it insures your home, not the landscaping. Mm-hmm. Typically. Now, you can get special riders that will do that, but really the major issue is homeowners' duty of care when it comes to risk of trees and tree risk management. That's a much bigger issue, because if you have a tree that looks dangerous, then you, as the owner of that tree, have a duty to recognize the danger, and you can't just be passive about it. You have to be proactive about it. And I'm not a lawyer, I can't give legal advice, but from a legal duty perspective, you have to inspect your trees periodically, and then if you see something that looks dangerous, you have a duty to mitigate that danger within a reasonable period of time. And typically for like a homeowner, you would be looking at maybe once every 5 years of inspection. Look for dangerous things, and when you find something that looks dangerous, you do something about it. But for something like a theme park, where you've invited guests for a fee to come and visit the park, then your inspections are going to be much more frequent. So for a theme park, you might be inspecting once a year, or maybe even multiple times a year, maybe even once a month, and after each storm, depending on the frequency that the areas are occupied and the number of trees that you have. And so for those cases, if you have a large number of trees and you're inviting the public to come and visit your property, then you do have a much greater duty, and you should have something called a tree risk management policy. And that if something bad does happen, then it will significantly reduce your liability. Anytime somebody gets injured on somebody's property, somebody's going to get sued. You can't avoid that. But what you can avoid is the catastrophic liabilities that are associated with tree failures, where something maybe should have been done. And if you don't have a good tree risk management policy that ensures the inspections, that ensures the frequency of inspection, that ensures the risk threshold that you anticipate and have everything risk assessed over time, and then you really can't prove that you met your duty. And so it's a tool that allows you to limit your liability.
Well, thank you for that. Now, for the average homeowner who does not have a tree risk management policy in place, what do they typically, from your experience, or what do you see that they do as far as failing to document perhaps care that they involving a tree that perhaps ends up being a type of negligence or something that ends up costing them in a claim?
So a lot of times people think, well, if I didn't take a photograph of it, nobody will know.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not true. Today, with today's technology and everything that's available on the public domain, people's property is being photographed multiple times a year.
Sure.
These photographs are taken by municipalities, they're taken by Google Street View, they're taken by aerial photography, satellite imagery. And so when we are assigned a case to investigate a case of negligence, there is going to be a wealth of data that we can glean from the historical photography, historical imagery that's out there in the public domain, and there's a lot of it. Most people have no idea. So if you didn't recognize that dead tree had been standing there for 5 years,
mm-hmm.
you can, the investigators are going to find it. And when they find it, then that's going to increase your liability because you had a duty to mitigate that danger before it occurred. Now, oftentimes a tree, I'd say more often than not, a tree can be mitigated before the danger causes a problem. But there are occasions when there's a true act of God, and true acts of God, there's no liability for that, but they're kind of rare. True acts of God are much more rare than preventable tree-related losses and dangers.
Well, thank you. And speaking of acts of God, I have a question from Doug Quinn. He and his family was a victim of Hurricane Sandy. They were displaced from their home for a number of years. Now he heads up the American Policyholder Association, and he has submitted this question for me to ask you. And I have no relation, so we do share the same last name. But Doug asks, are there standardized protocols to assess the risk of a given tree on a property? And what would it take to make that assessment mandatory, part of due diligence when buying a home or taking out a homeowner's policy?
Well, it's a great question because most people don't realize what their duty is until something bad happens. And insurers are getting more and more reluctant to write policies for areas that do not have a good tree risk management execution and policy. And the reason is because there's a lot of losses that are associated with trees. When trees fall and fail, when they're near people, they're going to cause damage to property, serious injuries, and even deaths. To kind of give you an idea just how risky tree-related injuries are, if you were to get struck by lightning, chances are about 60-40 that you will live. But if you get struck by a falling tree or a falling tree part, the chances are about 60-40 that you're not going to make it. So tree risks are actually much greater than people realize. And it's a reasonable expectation within our legal system that people will do what they need to do in order to keep their trees reasonably safe, right? Well, if they fail to do that and they don't realize their duty until after something bad happens, well, then they look back and they go, wow, we really should have done something different. If insurance companies were less focused on, and I don't want to be critical of the insurance industry, but the actuaries are myopically focused on the consequences of something bad happening, right? Mm-hmm. And so they've got those numbers down. pretty good, and they know how much it's going to cost when something bad happens, because they got those numbers down pretty good. That's how they calculate the value of the insurance policy. But most people are reluctant to just remove all trees, because if we remove all the trees, then we're not going to have any benefits that the trees provide, and the trees provide plenty of benefits. And so I think there's kind of this disconnect between the benefits that trees provide and the consequences of something bad happening when they fall or fail. And I think where the opportunity is, we could work with tree risk folks. Insurance companies could work with tree risk experts to determine, hey, if we do this tree risk assessment periodically, say once every 3 years, once every 5 years, then we're going to reduce or eliminate the liabilities that the insurance companies are faced with. And insurance companies pay out a lot of money for tree damages. A lot of money.
Sure. Yeah, they absolutely. Yeah, especially when you factor in wind and just the damage from trees is likely one of the most expensive types of claims when it comes to homes. And so,
and trees truly are unique. I mean, it's one of the few things that you have on your property that you have a duty to make sure are safe. And the way you do that is through tree risk assessment, through tree risk management policy. And the ANSI A300 has a clause 13, which outlines the protocol for doing a tree risk assessment.
Is there anything that you think, or any type of legislation, or perhaps just maybe incorporating it into proper due diligence when buying a home, that could make this more prevalent and make it perhaps mandatory? I don't really like to, say things should be mandatory, but from a due diligence.
Well, I would think that the insurance industry would want to make it mandatory, because it just saves them money. I mean, and I don't think you need legislation to do that. You need competent insurance mandates that would ensure people are doing their diligence.
Yeah, I mean, the premium is derived, it takes into consideration many factors, but the risk of a home, they do, I think, consider sometimes like trees in close proximity to that regard. But I am not aware of the health of a tree.
Just because a tree is close to a house doesn't mean that it's dangerous. And I see this happen all the time, where the tree gets blamed for all kinds of stuff. And you'll have claims, especially in the home warranty area. You'll have people that have claims because the plastic soils or whatever, the foundation gets destroyed. And then, of course, the engineers come along and say, well, there's a tree right there. It must be the tree. And it's almost never the tree. I can tell you that.
Wow.
It's almost never the tree. Occasionally you'll see that happen, but it's rare.
Well, thank you. All right. So Marty Shaw, registered consulting arborist. What would you say is the single biggest liability mistake that you see tree service companies make?
Oh, well, there's a lot of tree fellers out there, and they're not aware of what the OSHA regulations say about tree care operations. And if you don't have a certified arborist doing the work for you, you are taking on a tremendous liability there, because you don't know that the people that are doing the work have been trained to do it safely. And that's probably, over the years, that has probably been my biggest complaint, that it takes more credentials to cut hair than it does to legally cut trees.
Yeah, I think that's the truth, and that's for sure.
Tree work is the most dangerous profession in the world. It's 10 times more dangerous than the next most dangerous profession. And most people don't realize that. If you go to work on a construction site, there's all kinds of licensing and OSHA compliance training that they have to do. But in the tree world, if you got a chainsaw and a pickup truck, they'll let you go cut trees. Our society needs to change that.
Yeah, and I think that in certain municipalities it is changing. I don't know if all the changes are having the impact that perhaps everybody would want, but there are changes. It's just a slow process happening, and especially I know just being in close proximity to Atlanta, Atlanta has gone through an overhaul with their tree protective ordinance, and
Right.
There's been a number of changes there. But when a removal goes wrong, what separates a tree removal company that's perhaps protected versus one that's exposed to the tragedy?
Well, safety and education training is paramount. Companies that don't do it wrong. And when they do it wrong for long enough, something bad's going to happen. Everybody in the tree industry who does tree work gets injured. Everybody. Where you have catastrophic and horrific injuries or fatalities is where people are just aren't really competent to be doing the work, and there just isn't a lot of licensure requirements for most regions of the country, and so the training and education is vital. It really should be something that every state should require licensure for.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the impact from something gone wrong is just too significant, I think, to overlook. And that
it really makes sense that you need more licensure to cut hair than you do to cut trees. It doesn't make it from a safety standpoint. It certainly doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah, it sure doesn't. In Atlanta, they've done an overhaul to the tree protective ordinance, and they have here tree service companies that now have to register with the city. And it's my understanding that those companies have typically or are supposed to have an arborist on staff, or one that they contract with. I'm not exactly sure how that works, because it appears that perhaps some companies may not have an arborist on staff and some do. Now, so if they don't, then what? Would they reach out to somebody like you, or when they needed to have an arborist?
Well, they're not going to reach out to me, because I'm not going to do that kind of work.
Okay.
I mean, I'm way deep into the litigation support.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not going to be involved in any tree company's daily operations.
Yeah.
But I have worked on a lot of different assignments where tree companies were accused of doing some bad things. And probably the number one thing that people should be aware of is that if you're a tree company and you're assigned, given a contract to remove trees from somebody's property, you had better know where the boundaries are. Because if you don't know where the boundaries are and you happen to cross that line or get one that's on the line, that you're going to get sued. It's just that simple. And so you can avoid a lot of that stuff by either having the owner of the property give you a authorization that says they know where the boundary is and they've told you where the boundary is explicitly, and absolves you of any kind of liability associated with the boundary. Or you get a survey done and you know where the stakes are, and that way you can say, well, that's not on your side. You've got to get with your neighbor and agree to do this work, because a lot of people don't realize that tree law is unique in that, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but trees that are wholly on your property, that are on the inside of your boundary, the above ground buttress and root system are all on your property. Well, that tree is your tree, but the part that grows over onto your neighbor in Atlanta and in Georgia, that portion of the tree is called ownership in severalty. In other words, the part that's growing on your land is yours. But the part that grows on your neighbor's, well, your neighbor can cut that if he wants to. Now, he can't steal the fruit, but it's owned in severalty, so he can actually sever it at the boundary. Now, that may not be good for the health of the tree, and so you have to be cautious when cutting trees that are actually growing on your neighbor's property, because if you cause any permanent injury to that tree, you can be held liable for the injury that you've caused, even though the part was on your property. So you have to be cautious about causing permanent injury. And you start getting into the permanent injury area, when you start cutting branches that are over 4 inches in diameter. So anything that's over 4 inches, it's iffy as to whether or not it's going to cause permanent injury to the tree. Now, let's say that the tree is growing right straddling the boundary. Well, in Georgia, most areas of the country, we call it ownership and tenancy, where you and your neighbor own the tree equally, and you cannot do anything to the tree unless you both agree to it. You're both married to the tree, and you both have to agree if anything's going to happen to it. So you can't do anything to a boundary tree. So you actually have more rights in a boundary tree than you do in a tree that's wholly owned on your property.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting.
You can, and you in the world of law, that actually is a thing, and it's been around since the Middle Ages.
Wow. Well, I know you touched on, the diameter of a tree, and of course, the bigger the diameter, the heavier and more damage perhaps the tree could cause. With Atlanta's new tree protective ordinance, a 20-inch oak has gone from perhaps around $700 for removal to obtain a permit for removal to now $2,800. So I've heard developers say that this is going to result in an increase in housing costs, which, okay, perhaps, it's perhaps when they're clearing the land, it's going to, increase their expenses. Maybe there could be an argument made saying that the due diligence should be done before the purchase, to perhaps use that in negotiating the purchase price of the property. But for a developer on a wooded lot, where does getting it wrong cause them a cost problem, and that cost problem potentially turning into a liability problem when they're looking at clearing land?
Well, that's a very interesting question with some potential constitutional ramifications, because when you own property, if you are somehow limited by the police state of using that property and enjoying it any way you wish, anything that impinges on that right of enjoyment, whether it's cutting the tree down or leaving it there for next generation, could be considered a taking. And so if it limits you from doing what you would ordinarily be able to do, that would not require police action. In other words, it's not, there's a big distinction between a eminent domain taking and just limiting what you can do with the property. And so there is that fine line that it can become an issue, and some of these ordinances actually have been found to be unconstitutional. So you have to be kind of careful how you interpret that. Yes, if the ordinance is legal and it's constitutional and it's within the rights of the municipality to do that, then yeah, of course it's going to increase the cost of producing or developing land. But at the same time, what are we losing when we cut down the 20-inch trees? Are we losing a lot of environmental benefits or aesthetic benefits, social benefits, and other benefits that have worth, that have monetary worth? And my answer to that would be, well, yes. If we're going to remove trees, then there's a greater cost than just the fine that the municipality imposes. You lost the tree. And the tree has a lot of benefits. In fact, I wrote a book about that.
Sure.
About 85% of my book is all about the benefits of trees and why they have value. And so you do have to, I think it's justified when a municipality charges a fairly substantial amount of money for a good sized tree, because the city is actually losing some of those benefits. And not only that, but the owner of the property is losing benefits. And if you can rework the design and rework the development so that you preserve the trees, and there's a whole ANSI standard for doing exactly that, tree preservation. So my recommendation would be get the arborist involved early before you start the excavation. because they can tell you which trees are going to be worth the most, where you can save money by not removing the trees. And that way we can do both. We can have really nice developments and preserve the big, healthy trees.
Absolutely. And I would think that even from perhaps a buyer's agent perspective, for a real estate agent acting on behalf of the developing company, or if the company has their own staff that's procuring the purchase of land, it sounds like it'd be a great idea to consult with an arborist prior to making an offer on the property, to just really understand
Sure.
the types of costs.
And one of the areas I've been working with developers on over the last 5 years, much more so than I did previously, is that they are really interested in these ordinances that the cities are putting out, and they don't want to spend money unnecessarily by removing trees. They actually do want to preserve them. And so we've been doing a lot of inventory work to let them know what trees are worth keeping, which ones can go, and what the value of those trees might be from a municipal standpoint, but also from an aesthetic standpoint.
Well, thank you. And again, Marty Shaw, registered consulting arborist. What is one piece of advice that you could put in every homeowner or contractor's hands to protect themselves from any type of event that could end up being potentially catastrophic or result in injury?
If you see something dangerous, don't ignore it. If a tree looks dangerous to you, well, I guess you would just follow the duty, and that is inspect your trees periodically. If you're a developer or a contractor, inspect them before you begin the work. And you do that by doing an inventory, maybe coming up with some specifications for tree preservation that are to standard. And then if you see something that looks bad, see something that looks dangerous, see something that looks like it's going to harm the tree, make sure you take action to prevent that, because it'll save you a lot of money down the road. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In case of trees, a few ounces of prevention is probably worth a ton of cure.
Absolutely. And so you literally wrote the book that many institutions across the country, I understand, use, and arborists themselves or aspiring arborists may refer to learn more. But that book is the Professional Amenity Plant Appraisal Handbook. Can you tell us what? Now, it seems to be self-explanatory, but there's a lot more in it than perhaps meets the eye, I understand. And what would you like to share about that book?
So tree appraisers have been appraising the value of trees, I guess, since the early 1900s, early 20th century. And so plant appraisal, tree appraisal, amenity appraisal is not anything new. But typically when people think of tree value, they think of the wood products that you could make out of the wood fiber, right? But when it comes to amenity trees, that's a much more esoteric, ephemeral type of concept, because people really don't think about trees growing in your yard as having a specific value. They just think, well, it's part of the real estate, and when you buy and sell a piece of real estate, that's part of it, And really, when we buy and sell real estate, we're not thinking of the trees. The real estate appraisers, when they see a tree, they see dirt. Well, trees are not dirt, and you can prove that trees are not dirt. They provide benefits that dirt doesn't provide. And so over the years, we've, as an industry, have developed the core principles and practices that you have to undertake in order to properly and accurately solve a tree appraisal problem. Since the 1970s, there's been a book out there that was produced by the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers. They've made 10 different revisions of that, or editions of that. When they went from the 9th edition to the 10th edition, there was some funny stuff going on. And they departed from the structural elements that tree appraisal practice has relied on from the early 1900s, and they switched it. and they said, no, that's no good, without any rationale, without any reasoning, and really without any competence behind the changes. And so because of that, I knew that that new edition was coming out. It was wrong. It was bad. It had flaws beyond talking about. And so I thought, once they go from the 9th to the 10th, it's going to create a lot of problems in the industry, and especially in courtrooms. And so I decided that I would undertake writing this book, which was really a refinement of the 9th edition. Took out some things that were in the 9th that weren't so good, and it put in some things that were new and novel, but were also deeply rooted in the fundamental principles and practices of plan appraisal that had occurred since the beginning. And so it was just an alternative to what the industry was heading towards, and it was an attempt to try to get the industry back on track, and it was very well received. And so there's not really a competing between what the 10th edition of the CTLA document says and what my book says. My book has a lot of stuff in it that just refined what we previously were doing and what we do now.
Well, thank you, Marty. And so for someone who's looking to get in touch with you or bring you in before a problem, or perhaps, a developer or an insurance carrier, what does that look like, and how do they reach you?
Well, I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn, and I have a lot of connections on LinkedIn that are insurance adjusters, and I work with a lot of trial attorneys. So people really seek me out. I haven't really had to work that hard to find other people. If you need somebody with that kind of expertise, if you go on to AI and do a search, or if you do a search engine, I'm going to be one of the top people that you get.
You are the top from my experience.
And so I'm not that hard to find. If people need me, they'll find me.
Well, great. Hey, thank you, Marty. This has been really interesting. I feel just really fortunate to know you and to have learned more about you and pre-appraising. And I'd like to thank you for your time here. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Well, sure, Frank. I just want to wish you a very happy Independence Day weekend. I hope you get to spend lots of time with your family and friends. And I do enjoy the work. My favorite thing to do in this line of work is anytime I get a new case file, I open the box, I pull out the retainer check, and I set that aside. And then I start to peel back the onion, what actually happened here. And that is my favorite part of doing consulting work. I really am curious. I just want to know what happened.
Defining the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Step number one.
Step one, right.
Yeah. Hey, well, thank you, Marty. Yeah, it's a big one, 250 years. I hope that you and your family also have a great Independence Day and enjoy it. And I really do appreciate your time. Thank you.
Live the dream, my friend.
Thank you.